Former Vice President Mike Pence says the Republican Party cannot offer any support for Russian President Putin, putting him at odds with his former boss. His comment comes 1 week after former President Trump called Putin, quote, smart and savvy, and disparaged American leadership. As U.S. lawmakers discuss how to best support Ukraine, Senate Republicans have threatened to stall a funding package that could include humanitarian aid to the European country. For more, let's bring in CBS News political reporters Caitlin Huey-Burns and Adam Brewster. So, Adam, give us the backstory here. Tell us how former Vice President Mike Pence ended up making this very public split with former President Trump on Russia, and how is that playing out in the party?
Right. Well, it was very public in a speech that was given behind closed doors, we should note, Elaine, at the Republican National Committee's donor retreat over the weekend in New Orleans. But essentially, former Vice President Mike Pence said there's no room in the Republican party for apologists for Vladimir Putin. And as you mentioned, that came several days after former President Trump called Putin smart and savvy in an interview, and that happened before the Russian invasion. He sort of continued to call Putin smart when he was at CPAC a couple days later after the invasion of Ukraine had begun. And Pence also, whereas Trump has frequently criticized NATO when he was in office and since he has left office, Pence said, anyone who wants to say that NATO expansion is to blame for this is incorrect. And where would our friends in Eastern Europe be without NATO? Imagine where Russian tanks would be if it were not for that NATO alliance. So coming down very strongly on the side of NATO, and certainly, again, drawing those contrasts with the way that former President Trump has talked about Vladimir Putin, has talked about NATO since he took office, or when he was in office, and since he has left. One other area where, Pence did draw this contrast with Trump was saying, the Republican Party, in order to win in 2022 and beyond, has to present a forward-looking vision and isn't going to win by relitigating battles of the past. Of course, former President Trump has often in his public remarks, looked back at the 2020 election results as much as he has tried to look forward.
Well, Caitlin, back after President Trump's phone call with President Zelensky, which led to former President Trump's first impeachment, you see Minority Leader, or House Minority Leader, rather, Kevin McCarthy, defended it to our colleague, Scott Pelley. How has McCarthy's evolution on Ukraine been illustrative of the party's shift?
That's right. Remember, this phone call with Zelensky was at the heart of the impeachment proceedings because in that phone call, Zelensky was asking for the U.S. to provide, to sell military aid to Ukraine. They were asking for javelins. And Trump, according to that transcript, said, I would like you to do us a favor, though. Remember those infamous lines that were at the heart of those impeachment proceedings. Fast forward a few years and you have Republicans demanding more weapons be sent to Ukraine to fight. And what's interesting here is that at the time, that clip that you're referring to in which McCarthy told Scott Pelley that he didn't see anything wrong with that conversation, that he didn't do anything wrong in that conversation, that and Republicans at the time argued that the aid at that point did end up going through. But it's really interesting here to look at the dynamics within the Republican Party when it comes to Russia and Ukraine. A couple of weeks ago, we were reporting that Republicans that Donald Trump was very much supporting or saying favorable things about Putin. He was calling him smart and savvy, and some other high-profile Republicans in the party had kind of echoed some of that rhetoric. But then when the invasion happened, you saw increasingly Republicans on Capitol Hill come out forcefully calling Putin, criticizing Putin and blaming this squarely on Putin. So you really have Trump and allies in kind of far-right media amplifying what Trump is saying. But on Capitol Hill, Republicans are much more hawkish when it comes to Putin. You're not hearing them echo any of Trump's words. In fact, a lot of them, when asked, are issuing criticisms towards Putin and trying to distance themselves from the former president. So that's an interesting dynamic to watch. We know that the base of the Republican Party is often at odds with Republican Party office holders. So we'll see kind of how that resonates with the base of the party. But so far, Republicans, at least on Capitol Hill, are taking a pretty hard line against Putin.
Well, Adam, former President Trump addressed that same donor retreat that Mike Pence did. He spoke on Saturday night. What were some of his key messages?
Well, this again was an event that was close to donors, but, according to a source, he, continued some of those attacks against NATO, right a day after former Vice President Pence sort of offered some praise of the alliance. Former President Trump, in his remarks, according to a source, called NATO a paper tiger and sort of asked, are countries going to sit by and watch as potentially millions of people are slaughtered? At what point do countries step in and stop these crimes against humanity? He also, criticized the way that President Biden has drawn some lines in the sand, saying he shouldn't be out there so publicly, saying what he will and will not do with Russia. Of course, the U.S. and NATO allies have offered support for Ukraine, providing military funding or military equipment and other types of funding and aid. But they have said that they don't want there to be, ground troops or direct involvement to avoid escalating the situation with Russia. Now, we should note, separately, our colleague Robert Costa reported last night that former President Trump was not invited to an American Enterprise Institute forum that will take place this weekend in Georgia. This will be a big conservative event, with top sorted donors. And we know that, based on our colleague Robert Costa's reporting, that the former president will not be among those in attendance.
Interesting. Well, Caitlin, emergency aid to Ukraine is coming up as a possible sticking point in an upcoming federal spending package. What are Senate Republicans expressing concerns about?
That's right. The Congress has until this Friday, the 11th, to fund the government, or else the government shuts down. And what's happening here is that aid for Ukraine is going to be part of a larger spending package. And Republicans had taken issue with other parts of that package, namely more funding to fight COVID-19. They want funds that have already been attributed to fighting COVID-19 to be repurposed for that. So there are a couple bigger sticking points in this bill, and because it's all tied together, you're seeing some Republican opposition and attempts to slow this down because of various sticking points. But talking to Republican lawmakers on Capitol Hill and aides today and last week, I've been hard-pressed to find Republicans who don't want to send aid and assistance to Ukraine. And what they're looking at is a American public broadly and in a bipartisan way supportive of helping Ukraine. We see that in our CBS News polling, that there is wide bipartisan support for issuing sanctions against Ukraine, issuing sanctions against Russia, sanctions against Putin, sending military equipment to Ukraine to help in the fight. So there is broad bipartisan support for some of the actions that the administration is taking. There is bipartisan support for sending aid and weapons to Ukraine. The question is, how does this get broken down in that package? You have had some conservative Republicans who want this to be separate from the overall spending bill, but leadership in both parties say that they want this all to be in one bill. So that is going to be something to keep an eye on and to look for as Congress tries to get all the votes to pass the spending bill.
Caitlin, Huey-Burns, and Adam Brewster, it's good to talk to you both. Thank you.
Thank you.